Hey guys, we are coming to you live from the Schaefer basement, which is about the only quiet spot that I'm able to find. So, anyway, um, just as a reminder, if you found this video, I'm going to try to email it to you. Remember, we are trying to go to this stuff here, okay, on Power School and getting all. So, tomorrow there or next week, there'll be a day two stuff. That'll be Monday. Um, right now, what you need is the notes for the taxes, and we're going to rip through it pretty quick. But here's what those notes look like. Those are the top. You're going to fill out some of these blanks. Hopefully, they all match up all right. Um, Again, if you didn't get a chance to print those out, you can download all this stuff on PDF. I know on Tuesday we got in trouble because not in trouble, but we got stuck because we could not come to school. So the plan was to have you pick these up. You can see that, you have all this stuff. We'll work on filling it out together. If you have a printer at home, we're not going to have any big problems with it. Um, if you don't, try to take a screenshot and go back and forth. And the nice thing about the videos is you'll be able to pause when you need to. You'll be able to fast forward when you need to if you don't want to see my face. So anyway, that's where we're headed. We're going to try to get through this, like I said, pretty fast. If you get behind, obviously pause stuff. We left our conversation back on last week with the conversation about like taxes, and we filled out that paper that you figured out how many taxes people were paying. And again, it wasn't the intention to make you think that people pay too much taxes, just giving you the information, right? And so you found that people pay somewhere, the poorest Americans probably about 20%, the richest Americans somewhere in the range of 50 to 55%. Usually rich Americans, they're smarter, so they get some tax breaks. But either way, to review that real quick, remember we looked at these tax brackets. That's the biggest one, the federal income tax, and how they take money from people, or how much money they take from people in terms of your income. Okay. Remember too, we had those social security taxes, and there's that list on that paper. I'm not going to repeat those just for the sake of time. So a lot of the stuff today, halfway obvious. But we are going to mention some things, maybe a couple small, quick little graphs that are pretty straightforward, give you a little bit of a history, and hopefully, give you some insight. But we're going to cover this whole chapter here quick today. So we know already that taxes are used for things, roads, public goods, protections, court systems. That would include probably the military. I mentioned that twice. Your education, salaries, and then the biggest spending is in those welfare and social programs, those Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance. The military being another big one as well. Okay, so anyway, as we move into the future, it seems that we have to provide people with more stuff, and again, the population's bigger, and since we have to provide them more stuff, that's going to cost us more money. Federal income tax, the biggest chunk of money that the government collects, actually wasn't started until 1914, and it was actually only 1%. And in 1944, it got up to 94%, which, if you know, that's from during World War II. And we talked about the progression of how the government's gotten involved in our lives. Remember, we started with, after the Great Depression and the New Deal, we start moving towards a more social attitude, or socialist attitude, I should say. And those programs that came about it, the start of Social Security is a big example of that. After World War II, we start funding a military more, to be prepared rather than reactive. And we also had a war on poverty through the 60s and 70s that have kind of changed how much money the government and how much stuff the government does within our daily lives. I pulled up this website here. So this here is 1913. This is the first income tax that was ever instituted. Before that, it was deemed unconstitutional by the Congress. But either way, it's kind of interesting to see that even basically, I mean, $463,000. Today would be an extremely well-off person. Notice it is in constant 2013 dollars, so it stays about the same. And even the richest Americans, if I made over $11 million a year, I was only paying 7%. Obviously, now that's 37%, somewhere in that range. So, just kind of interesting how small it started off, and how I can see people be like, it's not that big of a deal. And then, kind of moving through, I'll stop at another pretty significant time in the middle of World War II, 1944. We start seeing that, it is full blown basically socialism, how much money we are paying towards taxes. And so even towards, the richest Americans, even the poorest Americans are still paying a very, very high percentage, which is just kind of interesting to see. Currently, obviously, they are in this range. And so anyway, it's progressed, it's developed over time, and different presidents have done different things, and just kind of interesting to see as we've gone through. I'll let you do your own research on that. So we've got three main entities that collect taxes. We got federal, state, and local. Federal is the biggest. State government does a whole lot of stuff too. State income tax, gasoline tax, sales tax, that's the big ones we pay. Property tax is another one. And then local governments also charge some taxes too. We don't have a local sales tax. Chicago has a local sales tax, but not necessarily a huge deal to know that. All right. Really, the only thing we don't pay taxes on is what's referred to as unprepared food. So I'll give you an example there. Fried chicken at Martin's is taxed with 7% sales tax here in Indiana. However, if it's uncooked that we get from the butcher in the same store, it is not taxed. Okay, so kind of a good rule is unprepared food, that whether or not we pay sales tax on. So there's kind of two ways people approach on how to pay taxes. So the benefits received principle kind of refers to the fact that if I use something, so for example, the gasoline tax is a good example of this. And when the government first started building interstates, they were having trouble justifying paying for those, and people said, well, I don't drive on those interstates, I shouldn't have to pay them. And the government said, okay, well, let's just tax gasoline, not just gasoline, but let's tax gasoline. That way we know if people drive, they have to buy gasoline, and we kind of know who is using that particular benefit, so to speak. Okay, so that's kind of one way people justify taxing. And then the other way, which has become more popular, is the ability to pay principle, which basically represents that, if you have more money, you should give more of it to the government because you have the ability to do so. So those are the two ways, straightforward, you can look at yourself. All right. So how do we know how much to pay? Well, the government's going to tell us, but sometimes you'll see the phrase tax base. Okay. So that's the products that's taxed. So sometimes if we're, for example, using a sales tax, so let's say I buy a pair of shoes for $100. Okay. Well, I've got to multiply that by the tax rate. That's the percentage. Okay. And the percentage for sales tax, 7%. So it would be 100 times 0.07, which would equal $7. Okay, so again, sometimes you see that phrase. Sometimes tax rates would also be a flat fee. I kind of give you an example of that: fishing, hunting licenses, state park fees. Like everybody pays $3, right? And every time you use it, or whatever. Three different methods of taxation, and you want to halfway understand these graphs here. Sometimes they pop up. Sometimes you'll see them. But again, as you define these, so a progressive tax, well, what that means is the rich pay more. Okay, so as your income increases out to the right here, your tax rate's going to go up. Our best example, that's the federal income tax, right? The poorest Americans pay 10%. As I become more and more rich, closer to LeBron James, I'm going to pay closer to that 37% rate. Okay, so again, the more money I earn, the higher percentage I pay. The next one's going to be a proportional tax, and that's going to say that everybody pays the same percent. Indiana state income tax is a great example of that, 3.3%, no matter who you are. If LeBron James, let's use Peyton Manning as an example, when he was the quarterback for the Colts, 3.3%. Mr. Schaefer, I was a college student when he was still playing, so that would be still 3.3%. Okay, so anyway, that's the same. All right. And then the last one is a regressive tax, which is a little bit more difficult to understand, but we used that example of hunting licenses a second ago. Well, if I make $1,000 a week and I have to buy a hunting license and say it is $25, right? Versus someone that makes $100 a week and they have to pay that same $25, his income's really low. His tax rate's going to be really high. $25 out of $100 is 25%. Whereas my income is 1,000 and I only have to pay 2.5% towards that particular tax. And so those taxes exist. Usually, you don't say people, oh, poor people should have to pay more, but they do exist. The same concept can be true if me and that other person were to buy the same television. So if we buy the same television, well, if I have to pay that same $25 of tax out of my $1,000 income, and he has to pay that $25 tax out of his $100 income, his tax rate is significantly higher. All right. Obviously, paying taxes is required by law, and those of you that did the assignment about the tax burden, you found that very quickly, people pay a significant amount of money in taxes. Some of these movie stars, they will get in the spot where they might make $10 million in a year. And again, if I have to pay $3.6 million of that to the federal government, well, that creates an incentive to maybe steal, right? I wouldn't call it stealing, but just failing to pay your taxes. And again, people have gotten caught trying to get away with some of that stuff. And when we talk about such high amounts of money, people have that incentive. Most famously, probably Al Capone. You guys may remember learning about Al Capone. Did not go to jail for murder. Did not go to jail for even moonshining. He went to jail for not paying his taxes. There are ways to avoid some paying taxes. There's tax breaks. There's certain retirement funds you can put your money in. You can donate money that you don't have to pay as much towards taxes. There's a few different ways. If you pay for interest on your student loans, for example, some of you will be in that situation. You won't have to pay tax on that money that you paid towards it. There's a whole bunch of different ways. That's not necessarily what this class is about, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. If you have questions, by all means, email, and I will try to get a hold of you, or I will try to answer it for you. All right. Sometimes states can compete by how much they charge in taxes. And so, for example, if you look down below here, you can see as an example, Indiana state income tax is 3.3%. California state income tax is 13.3%. This is for the richest Californians. And then you also have Texas state income tax at 0%. So sometimes you might hear in the news, especially with, and this is a chart that just shows you the richest, the highest tax bracket for each state. Sometimes you might hear in the news, especially with professional athletes. So say professional athlete A is going to make $20 million a year in Texas or Florida for that matter. And his option is to go play in Texas. Well, if his other option is the same amount of money, $20 million to play in California, he is going to be able to keep way more money by playing in the state of Texas. So sometimes you hear that talked about in contract negotiations. Not necessarily every single time, but it is one way that states try to compete to get businesses and also individuals to come and create some economic activity within their states. So countries can do similar to the same thing. If you talk to Donald Trump right now, one of his things is he is trying to not provide tax breaks for companies that move overseas, and he wants to keep the workers here in the United States. And one of the reasons the companies are moving overseas is because they are able to take advantage of the cheap labor. And so one of his things is if you move overseas, you have to pay a certain amount of taxes to sell your goods here in the United States or something like that to try to disincentivize workers leaving the country or incomes leaving the country, maybe we should say. Just kind of some stats here. You can look at them on your own. They're a little bit dated from 2010. Not really important for what we need to talk about. The one last concept that I do want to mention is that there is the concept that just because the government raises taxes does not mean that they will collect more money. So we mentioned already that different states are in the situation where they may not be able to keep the population there because they take too much money. Well, it kind of goes the same way for countries. The concept is referred to as the Laffer curve here. Okay, and I will draw that up really quick. All right. So the Laffer curve refers to this concept that if we raise taxes too high, then what's going to happen is people are going to do one of two things. One of those things either being moving away and going and earning an income somewhere else. The other one of those things is to try not to pay their taxes even more and try to find ways around the system. We know that this exists simply because illegal moonshiners try to perform this activity. So the Laffer curve is going to have an arc like this. It's going to go up and then it's going to come back down. Now, the important part is that we've got to label our axes correctly. So this axis is going to be government revenue. And this down here is going to be the tax rate. Right? And we're going to start down at 0. And theoretically, you could have a tax rate of 100. Now, the tricky part is no one really knows what that point is right there. Okay? We don't know what the best tax rate is. Excuse me, my handwriting here. Okay, and the reason for that is that everybody thinks a little bit differently, right? Some people say that I want to produce moonshine and sell it. Someone was like, I don't want to take the chance of doing that, and different people behave differently. And there's also that concept of, it's relative to what it's been, right? Are we going to start raising taxes or not, or are we going to lower taxes in terms of what we are trying to say? The one last thing I will say is, and that I'll mention it to kind of make another point, is right now, President Trump is going to argue that we are somewhere over here, right? He's going to say that, you know what, if we lower the tax rates, we are going to increase our income because people are going to want to go to work and they're going to want to save their money. And if we put that money down, or if we put that tax rate down, people are going to spend their money and create incomes for other people. And in fact, it creates more income than taking it away, so to speak. Okay, that's the theory of that trickle-down economics. You guys have heard that if you've taken U.S. history. President Reagan was really big on trickle-down economics. It caught some bad publicity through the 1920s. It was kind of blamed for the Great Depression as well. Now, this is where, on the flip side, right, the Democrats right now that are saying, and not so much, they're not talking about raising taxes too much, but they are talking about increasing government spending, taking care of people, trying to reduce the debt. The Democrats are going to say that we're over here and that if we raise taxes a little bit, we can collect a little bit more. Okay. And so, again, just kind of two concepts. We don't know, like I said, we do not know where we are at on this thing right now. Okay. We do not know. We do not know what the best thing is. And one year it might be one thing, the next year it might be a completely other thing in terms of where our government wants to behave. So for today, that's what I've got for you. Let me figure out how to close this. All right. All right. And making sure I don't have any other notes on here. Okay. Here's what I want you to do today, and I will post these questions. All right. These are opinion-based questions. So I will post these questions so you're quick, and I'm going to basically try to give you guys a daily blog type of activity each day that takes you about 5-10 minutes. Okay. And these questions I want you to answer. You can email them to me, and that's kind of how you'll get your daily participation grade as we kind of figure this out. I appreciate your understanding, as I've never used Screencastify, so this is new for me. So if I'm horrible at it, let me know what I can fix and try to make it better. All right. Enjoy some time off. Find a way to keep busy. Find a way to be healthier. Find a way to be smarter. We got a lot of free time, so Try to embrace some of the things that you can, okay, and try not to get too frustrated. Communicate with your teachers. When you have questions, ask. We will talk to you in the very near future.